Good. Well, what are your initial thoughts? This was a surprise to you?
It was a surprise, Suzanne. As I mentioned to you a few seconds ago, even though a person reaches a certain age, you still aren't really expecting that. You appreciate the life that they lived. And Richard did so much in his lifetime. He's known as the originator of rock and roll, of course, which started right here in Macon, Georgia, right down on Broadway, which is now MLK. Um, but he was a global citizen. He was from Macon, Georgia, but he was a global citizen.
How was he the architect of rock and roll? Really go into that,
Well, it really started with him. I did an interview about a year ago with the film crew, and I said when he started beating the pans and saying wop bop a loop bop a lop bam boom, it was as if the heavens opened up and said, well, let that be rock and roll. And that genre has been with us ever since. And people have been forever young because of it. I spoke with Paul McCartney's manager about an hour and a half ago, and Richard had such a huge presence in our world and in the world of music and entertainment.
That wop bop a loop bop, well, that's interesting that you talk about that. But he had so many songs that touched our lives.
That's true. That's really true. And that catalog will live on and on. You may not know this, but Michael Jackson bought the Beatles catalog. He gave part of his catalog back because Michael said Richard meant so much to him. And it's true. I mean, without Richard Penniman, Little Richard, the world would have been far bleaker over these last 50 or 60 years.
What did Little Richard mean to Pleasant Hill in that neighborhood?
Well, that was home. Pleasant Hill was home. Richard never forgot where he came from. He always talked about Macon, Georgia, and in particular, Pleasant Hill. And that community, when he grew up in it, was a very vibrant community. It was a community that so many of our leaders came from. And you see now a revitalization of Pleasant Hill going on. And hopefully the Little Richard House and Richard's memory can kind of help expand upon that revitalization project.
Well, do you expect people to drop flowers today at the house? And, have there been talks of a memorial?
I'm sure there will. I don't know that personally, but I'm sure that people will go by the house and pay their respects. I don't know if the house is open right now for that, but I'm sure there'll be some type of remembrance going on there. But the thing we want to remember mostly is the fact that Richard himself was such a enormous personality, and still today in 2020, probably one of the most famous faces and names in the world. And to know that he came from Macon, Georgia, and did that, anything is possible. The American dream still lives.
Now, are you cousins or a nephew? I was a little confused.
Cousins. Richard's a cousin on my father's side. I'll tell you a quick story. My mom's cousin was Richard Scott. Dick Scott managed the New Kids on the Block and got Mark Wahlberg's career started. And my father's cousin is Richard Penniman, of course. So I had a front seat to a lot of history in my lifetime, and I really thank them for that. Between those two gentlemen, between Richard Scott, who's from Macon, Georgia also, and Richard Penniman, the world of music was set right here in stone from Central Georgia.
What was it like when you were growing up with Little Richard being related to you?
Well, you really just appreciate the fact that you have those individuals in your family. You don't really look at people from a standpoint of being famous. You look at them from the standpoint of being family. And, you and I talked earlier, and I could call Richard anytime and talk about things and just talk about life in general. At this point in his life, the last few years, he had become more of a thinking about the afterlife, so to speak, and thinking about his spirit and things that he wanted to do in terms of making sure he was in connection, in step with the Lord, as he said,
That's interesting. Did he become more religious?
I think he did. As time goes on, I think individuals always have as you get closer to realizing your own mortality, you realize that you want to make sure that everything is in line. And I think he always had a caring spirit, always had a caring heart, But as he got older, he always talked about his religion and what religion meant to him.
How tickled was he to be the spokesperson for the song and soul of the South?
Well, there again, he always is very appreciative of everything Macon did for him in terms of, and what he did for Macon. He was a brand ambassador for Macon. If you call down to the Convention and Business Bureau, now you hear his voice. I had a chance to see Richard in October, and we went up to Nashville. The school at Fisk gave him an honor, and at that honor, there were a lot of Maconites who came to that honor for him, and he was just overjoyed, more so about the number of Maconites who came up from Macon to Tennessee for this honor from the Fisk Jubilee Singers. So he always thought about Macon, Georgia. He always talked about it, but there again, he was definitely a global citizen.
It wasn't always easy for little Richard growing up in Macon.
It was not. It wasn't easy for a lot of people here in Macon because of the racial climate at that time. And it's very sad because people missed out on so many great individuals who had so much to offer our city and offer our community. But it was not easy for him growing up here. But he made the best of everything, and he turned it into a positive, and had a life well lived from Macon, Georgia.
Didn't he used to work at the Pig and Whistle?
He did. Yeah, he worked at the Pig and Whistle. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Otis Redding worked there. Tennessee Williams worked at the Pig and Whistle. So it just goes to show that Macon had so much history, and we've got to do more. As you know, I was one of the candidates for Macon's mayor for a while, and I intend on being again in 4 years. And one of the platforms I wanted to talk about was tourism. We have so much to build on here in Macon, Georgia, and I just don't want us to miss the ball. Not just on Richard, but just overall, not missing the ball on what we have done from the city of Macon. And Richard plays a crucial part of that.
You mentioned Paul McCartney. Have other people been ringing your phone with condolences?
They have. I've heard from people all around the country, and I talked to Scott Rocha, who was Paul McCartney's manager, and Sir Paul sent Richard something just a few months ago up in Nashville. And so they stayed in contact with each other. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elton John, all those individuals credit Richard with really being the springboard from which they sprung, and created their own musical legends in history.
Did you know he was sick? I mean, he was 87, but did you know he was sick?
Well, when I last saw Richard, as I mentioned, in Tennessee, he was in a wheelchair, and he's almost 90 years old. He was almost 90 years old, and so I knew, we all, I think, kind of knew that, we're getting closer to that point. We never want to accept that with people that we love and care for, but at the same time, we really respect what they did in their lifetime, and he will always be remembered for what he did.
Any closing thoughts?
No, Suzanne, I just really thank you and WMAZ for the coverage. Thank you for what you all have to say today, and just remember Richard Penniman. Remember little Richard for the entertainer. Remember him for the kind person that he was, and let's keep his memory and his spirit alive, not just here in Central Georgia, but in the nation and the world.